Hey everyone. All right. We are here with another Facebook Live with Dr. Keesha Ewers. And I'm super excited about this conversation. And I know I'm tricking y'all because I said it was going to be in an hour. But it turns out in my mind it was going to be at a certain time. But what I actually coordinated with Keesha was a completely different time. So we are going to do it at the time she and I coordinated. And my apologies to all of you who were so excited an hour from now to be able to come on and ask your questions live. I suck and it's my fault. And
you don't suck. You just have summit brain.
Yes. And we can always ask Keisha to come back and do another Facebook Live with us with the questions, and maybe I won't screw up the next time. So anyway, technology is so fun. And I'm going to keep an attitude of gratitude, because even though it's a little frustrating dealing with all this tech stuff, super grateful that we can actually come together like this as a community and talk to brilliant people like Dr. Keesha and ask these questions and get support as women who I know are really struggling in this space and need a lot of wisdom and guidance from people who are super experienced and have made this their life's work. So thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure.
Well, there's so many things that we could talk about. I want to kind of get your perspective on a couple of things I actually asked Dr. Lyon a moment ago, because I think it's really valuable for people to hear how different practitioners might approach things. You know, maybe it'll be similar, maybe it'll be different. One thing that I found on my journey, and I just want to offer this as a frame for everyone who's like, one person says to do it one way and one person says to do it another way. There's a few things that have become a guidepost that have made it so that I don't go crazy getting myself well. Number one, there are lots of ways to skin a cat. So I just want to say that my healing path does not look exactly like Michelle Norris's healing path, does not look exactly like Keisha's. I mean, there's a lot of ways that women are getting well.
There are a lot of paths to the top of the mountain.
Yes.
Skinning a cat.
You know, like the skinning a cat. That goes back to my childhood. For some reason, that was like a really cute thing we did in childhood that's really morbid if you think about it too much. But
it's like killing two birds with one stone.
Right. Why do we say these things?
I'm like, why do you say that?
Yes. Goodness sakes. So there's more than one path up the mountain, and there are and it's, I think, and everyone is different. So the way, for example, I'll talk about my path and Michelle Norris's, because you guys heard Michelle Norris's interview with, you know, what she did with her toxic mold exposure, and you've heard my path and what I've been doing with my endometriosis / surgery / heavy metal exposure / everything else I've dealt with on my path. So we've both had a ton of success in getting our lives back, but we had to go about it different ways. And some of that is because we're different, and, you know, how things needed to be sequenced for us was a little bit different. And sometimes some of it's just because we worked with different people and they do the same thing different ways. So I want to talk a little bit about hormones. There's been a couple of questions that have come up in our community around getting your hormones tested. And on the optimal lab values tracker that we provided to everyone who signed up for Healing Rosie, we actually left off optimal values for hormones. And the reason for that, as you probably know, is because it depends on so many things, like where are you in your cycle, and how old are you, and are you perimenopausal, are you menopausal, like all these things. So like there's not really optimal values per se for hormones. And I know a lot of women would really like to know, what should I be looking for with my hormones? They want to feel more empowered. Like, I want to get my hormones and be able to look at it and see for myself what's in there. And there's not a perfect solution for that. And it kind of gets my goat a little bit, because we want to fix our female hormones together. But I thought it would be great for you just to speak to that a little bit, maybe talk a little bit about the labs, and, you know, maybe give people something they can use that might be actionable around labs, and give some perspective on the hormones. Another thing I want to say that you can also speak to is that fixing your hormones a lot of times doesn't have a whole lot to do with what your hormone numbers are. You're looking at so many other things to actually fix those numbers that are more actionable from a patient perspective, because I can't go put myself on bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. I have to work with someone like Dr. Keesha. So, you know, there's only so much that you could actually actionably do with your own hormone data. But Keesha, will you share with us on that?
Yes, that was a big, giant question. And so I'm going to break it down, because this is how I operate. Do
it.
I like to take it step at a time. And actually, you know, I'm just going to circle back to different people do things in different ways, and we're all different. We are. And there are different paths for each person, but there is a standard way that I want you to kind of think about how things should be unpacked. And that is, you always start with food. You know, that's like the one thing every one of us can agree on, is you always start with food, because while we're waiting for your laboratory data to come back, you can be eliminating alcohol and caffeine and sugar and processed foods, all of that stuff that causes inflammation and hormone imbalance, off of your plate, out of your cup. And then while we're waiting for that data to come back, you will then have great feedback from your body that you can provide to your provider, you know, and say, look, you know, I felt amazing, or I felt terrible, or this was going on. I got more acne. I got my acne cleared up. I gained weight. I lost weight. You know, I got constipated. I got diarrhea. All of those things are really important little clues. I always call myself a medical detective. And so always start with food. That's a big one, okay? Now, I'm going to unpack a little bit the word hormone, because it's a giant word, right? When we start saying hormone and what are optimal ranges of hormones, we have so many hormones in our body. And I think you're referring to just estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. But even with estrogen, we have 3 different kinds of estrogen. Then we have progesterone. Then we have testosterone. We have free testosterone, and we have total testosterone. Then we have our thyroid hormones. We have our adrenal hormones. We have our pancreatic hormones called insulin. We have our brain hormones that are neurotransmitters. There are 11 of those we can measure. So we actually have a lot of hormones that can be measured, and you're absolutely right. I'm glad you didn't put an optimal value on a guide for people because there's no such thing. Depending on your age, where you are in your cycle, and if you're already on something, if you're on an adrenal protocol, if you're already on thyroid medication, you know, like all these things matter. So I want to know, first of all, what you mean by hormones and when we're talking about it, so we're on the same page.
I think what you just said is actually fantastic, because
Okay.
I don't necessarily personally have an intention for it. People in the community are talking about it. And I think what you're saying is really useful, that there's a lot to hormones. It's not just those 3 sex hormones. Yeah.
Right. They're messenger chemicals that are, you know, the neurotransmitter, the brain hormones are released from the brain to tell the body what to do next. And the way that they're released and how they're released and how many of them are released and the ratio and combination of them is based on how you perceive your stress. And that's it. Solid. Mm-hmm. Right? So how you perceive your stress tells your brain, it alerts your brain of what it needs to release at the first level of hormones. And then those hormones come from the brain, and maybe they're fight or flight hormones. And then they tell your body, ooh, we're a zebra, we're being chased by a lion, right? So then a whole set of hormones are going to go into action in response to that, like cortisol from your adrenal glands. Your thyroid is going to do something different than if you're in a rest or digest situation. So is your pancreas. So you're going to release the insulin required to break down sugars, and you want sugars in your system so that they're usable. So all this stuff, you know, your estrogen, progesterone is going to go down if you're in that fight or flight response, because it's not safe to reproduce if you've got a lion on your tail. So that's going to be a response to stress. Then you have the other side of your brain, and that's the rest and digest or feed and breed side. And so those hormones, you're not going to be releasing cortisol. You're not going to have your digestive system shut down. You're going to be releasing the right amounts of reproductive hormones. And your pancreas is not going to go into that overdrive, and neither is your thyroid. So we can measure all of that. That's what's so cool. So the way that I work with people in my practice, both men and women, not just women, is I want to look at, first of all, what are they saying in their story? I'm overweight. I have this acne that's just in this zone or this zone or this zone. I've got brain fog. I'm having hot flashes. I don't have any libido. I have vaginal dryness. Like, what's in the story? For a man, I might be gaining weight in my torso area, just like a woman, maybe getting man boobs, right? So their estrogen is high, higher than their testosterone. So they also have to have that addressed. So I'm always measuring those things because that data is where I start. You are absolutely right. Like, you guys can't do your own hormone replacement because you need to start with that really important testing. Any provider, any OBGYN, and they do this all the time, that says, oh, you're having hot flashes, here's a script for Premarin, and doesn't test all of your entire endocrine system, is doing you a disservice. And that's why in the scientific studies that show higher risks of heart disease and breast cancer related to hormones, well, that's why that's in place, is because the proper testing is not being done. So we're just matching the pill to the ill, right? And in hormones, we want to be really careful. Now, there's another layer to this that I do, and it's genetic testing. This is the coolest time, I think, to be in medicine, because we can look at your genetics and we can see if you actually are wired in your liver to process your hormones properly. There are a couple of different genetic pathways that your hormones have to move through in your liver. And if those are not wired to do that smoothly, that puts you at a higher risk for cancers. So, and also being overweight and having mood disorders and brain fog and all the things that we start to notice as our body starts to have a harder time filtering. So I look for that. And then I also look at what we call urine estrogen metabolites. And I do a urine test for that. And I look and see, A, what are your genetics? And B, what are you actually doing? We never treat the gene. We always look and see what's going on with your own body. So I have a high risk for breast cancer. I've already had it once. My mom's had it. Everyone in my family has had it because we don't process estrogen well. And guess what? We've got a zillion different estrogen mimicking chemicals bombarding us every single day in our air, our water, our food supply, and our soil, let alone what we use in our household, as far as chemicals and what you put on your face and your skin. I mean, I am so clean and pure. I don't put anything on my skin except for sesame oil or rosehip seed oil, and I use all clean products. But still, I got breast cancer. It's out in the environment like crazy. So when I discovered the genetic component, it was like a get out of jail free card. I went, oh, I see now what's going on. And I was able to put myself on a protocol, and I've been cancer free for 10 years. So I think this is an important factor that also isn't discussed in the hormone discussion, right? We need to have that in that conversation. How do you process hormones? Do they go straight to fat because you're building up fatty liver because your liver's not processing hormones? In that case, it doesn't matter what kind you're taking. Even if it's bioidentical, your liver will have trouble with it. So those are all data points that I look for when I'm working with people.
Yeah. Okay. That was fantastic. Alrighty. Let's dive in here to some questions. The first one is from Cheryl. I have had no libido for 10 years, painful sex for 5 years, not on entry or dryness, only deep down, and I'm 60 years old. Would testosterone help with this? All my sex hormones are low. I tried progesterone, and it gave me severe pain, like endometrial pain with the bloating. My belly looked like I was 8 months pregnant. Fortunately, I was finally linked to spasmodic use of progesterone cream, so it stopped.
So no, testosterone doesn't help with vaginal dryness, but it can help with libido for sure. It's not the end-all answer for libido. There are 5 different root causes for low libido, but for menopausal women, testosterone a little bit can be helpful. Now, the symptoms that you had in response to your hormones, that's exactly what I was just talking about. It means your body is not wired to process them very well. And that bloating and the stuff that you're having means your liver is not dealing with it. And so then that means you need to be on a protocol that actually helps you metabolize your hormones. Now, in terms of the vaginal dryness, what I do is I look at fractionated estrogens, and then it depends on how your adrenals are doing, how your thyroid's doing. I look at the whole endocrine system. But testosterone is not going to help with the vaginal dryness. And here's the thing, ladies, vaginal dryness needs to be treated immediately. because the body has this really amazing and beautiful system that says when you touch a hot stove, you have a memory that that stove is hot and it's dangerous. So when you first have intercourse and penetration hurts, your body will remember that. You get a muscle memory. And as soon as something comes towards you, you know, whether it's a sex toy or a Kegel master or your partner, you're going to instantly start to tighten up. And whenever you tighten up, that's going to make everything worse. So it is really important to deal with that vaginal dryness. And I usually use a bioidentical estriol cream, depending on if you're processing your hormones well. If you're not, then I get you doing that first. And it sounds like you're not, before I give you a bioidentical hormone, because I don't want that building up in your system and putting you at risk for cancer. So I'm very careful. I'm very, very conservative. I prescribe bioidentical hormones to both men and women, but I track it really carefully.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about what you just said, because I'm imagining women who know they have a cancer risk or know they've had similar problems to the woman that asked that question. You just said that there's a protocol that you take your patients through to get the liver functioning better. Could you give us some insight on what that looks like?
It just depends on what the metabolites are that are showing up. So you can move those through. So for example, on my website on drkeesha.com in the store, I have these kits, and I have a breast cancer prevention kit. And that's my kit. That's the one that I designed for my metabolites. And I will prescribe that, but sometimes I alter it. In fact, most of the time, I'm doing some kind of personalization or individualization of those things in terms of changing the dosage, the amounts, or what they're getting. You may not need all four of the things that move hormones through your liver like I do. You may need just one at a low dose. So what we do is I do a series of 3 tests for metabolites. I do a baseline, and then depending on how bad it is, if it's as bad as mine was, and I'm telling you, the lab is an international lab that I use, and I had never seen anyone worse than my own data. And so I called them up and I said, I've never seen anybody worse than this in my practice. And she said, Dr. Ewers, I'm afraid I never have either. And I said, well, that's saying something, because you're looking at everyone in the world. And so, you know, I'm an overachiever on all things, including.
Yeah, right.
So I have to have quite a few things that I take. I take calcium D-glucarate. I take DIM. I take broccoli seed extract. You know, I go through quite a few different, I have to methylate properly. You know, it's not going to be just one gene that you're looking at. You're looking at the upstream genes of what's being affected when you are clearing that out too. So I have to take a pretty robust protocol to keep my liver happy. So some people don't. In fact, most don't. I've never seen anyone as bad as mine. So I individualize that. But you can get an idea from what I just said, the different kinds of nutrients I use. And then that breast cancer prevention kit is what I will begin with as a baseline, and then I individualize it.
Right. Okay. Anything else that you want to offer about painful sex? She says painful sex deep down.
Yeah. Vaginismus and vulvodynia are both different kinds of painful intercourse, and they eventually will have a mental component to them because, first of all, if you have a partner that's caring, they usually don't like to hurt you. And so it will affect the intimacy from both sides when you have painful intercourse. Like if you have a male partner, the male partner will be a little anxious, and sometimes that can actually affect their performance, so their own erectile function. So you really do kind of want to hop on this. Now, lubricants I recommend are going to be ones you can eat and not water-based. So I like coconut oil. I like sesame oil. Really basic, you know, stuff you would use in a skillet to stir fry your vegetables. That's what you want because it's going inside of you, which means you're eating it. So you don't, when you think about a water-based lubricant, if you were to drop a drop of water on a table and then start rubbing it, first you would slide, your finger would slide, and then everyone that's a child has done this, right? We all remember. Then you get this friction and things get really hot underneath your finger. And that doesn't feel good in your vaginal wall if your lining has thinned. And that's what causes that pain. Some people get to the point where it feels like cut glass in there. So using the lubricant, paying a lot of attention to lubing him up, lubing yourself up. If you're in a same-sex relationship, both of you get lubed up really well, depending on who's having the trouble. And you make sure that you spend a good amount of time with arousal before penetration happens. So I always say menopause means there's a pause, right? You're supposed to slow down. And so this is a great time for slow sex where you really take your time. You want to let everything unfold like a flower. If you try and go in too quickly, you'll be tight and dry, and it will actually rip your lining, and then that makes it hurt again the next time. So being slow, using a good lubricant, getting checked to see what your estrogen levels are, and your precursor hormones that help you make your hormones, and replacing those if you need them. And I like intravaginal replacement because I like for it to be right where it belongs so it can plump up those tissues.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. Awesome. Okay. Someone just asked right here in the Facebook Live here, for someone who has had childhood trauma and adult trauma, how do you heal and turn off that fight or flight response? I feel like it won't turn off. My digestion, nervous system, etc., all feels so out of sync, and I feel like I've tried it all.
We haven't tried it all to the place where it has turned it off, obviously. And this is the thing. It's who do you have a name for this person?
No, I can't see. All I see is comment from Facebook. Sorry,
okay.
guys.
I just wanted to talk directly to you because this is a big subject, and I'm really sorry, first of all, that you've been through that. One of the things that I always really, really pay attention to is making sure first that you have a calm, safe place that you can go to that's within you. So oftentimes you'll go and you'll get therapy, no matter what kind of trauma release therapy it is, and the therapist won't build what I call a resource place inside of you where you are linking your mind with your body. That's one of the things that happens is when we're in that fight or flight response all the time, we become disengaged. We're like disengaged heads walking around and just dragging our bodies behind us. And so we want to pull that together so you're in a collaborative relationship with your mind and body. So I can take you guys through how to build a resource state if you want to.
Sure.
You want to do it?
Let's do it.
Okay. So you're going to have to close your eyes if you're not driving or operating.
Right. I'm gonna do this along with you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Again, if you're driving, don't do this. So what we're doing is we're creating a place that could be from your imagination, or it could be a place you've been before. But I don't want it to be a place that everyone else goes to. So in other words, it's not your house. It's not a room in your house. It's not even your backyard, okay? And I want you to think about a place on the planet that brings you peace. It could be the ocean, it could be a meadow, a place by a creek or a lake or a river. It could be the desert, with a really cool tent. Whatever that is for you, a mountaintop cabin. So bring that up. It could be a secret garden. What is it for you, Misty?
The beach in the Bahamas.
Okay. So I'm just going to work with you and then everyone else play along. So
okay.
With your beach place in the Bahamas, I want you to put in all of the colors, all of the sounds, smells, how it feels, the temperature, the sun on your face, the breeze on your neck, how it feels under your feet, even how it tastes. Once you have that, check in and how do you feel when you're in this place? So how do you feel while you're here, Misty?
I feel quiet, still.
Okay. And where do you feel that quiet stillness in your body?
Kind of right between my heart and my stomach.
Okay. And what color would it be if you were to give it a color?
Like a blue-green.
Okay. So I want you to repeat quiet 3 times in your mind as you really drop into this place between your heart and your stomach, picturing your safe place. Now that's your cue word. So go ahead and open your eyes. How does that feel?
Really good. I want to go back.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's like this, this parasympathetic nervous system has just been upregulated, right?
Yeah, totally.
Now we're going to do the next thing. And this is where I start with all my patients that I do therapy with, is we start with this resource place and how to practice with it. So I want you to think of on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is the most angry you can be, and 0 is the most calm. Okay. And I want you to go to like a 1 or a 2 on the scale and think of an experience in your life that makes you slightly annoyed. What would it be?
Riley my dog wanting to go out when I'm on a work call.
Okay. So close your eyes and recall the last time Riley was trying to get your attention while you were on a call. And where do you feel that annoyance in your body?
My stomach.
And what color is it?
Purple.
Okay. So now I want you to say your cue word 3 times in your mind. Quiet, quiet, quiet. Drop back into your beach place. Pull that blue-green color through. Breathe it into that purple annoyance in your belly. When you're back down to 0, open your eyes.
It was almost immediate.
Yeah. Now, to the person that asked the question, that's only a 1 or a 2 on the annoyance scale, okay? Now we're going to go up to a 3 or a 4. What would a 3 or a 4 experience be for you?
What would annoy me at 3 or 4? I get really annoyed when, professionally, when someone on my team maybe isn't owning their deadlines. That can trigger me.
Okay. So close your eyes and go to the last time that happened for you. And where do you feel that 3 or 4? And what color?
It's the same, some kind of purple.
Okay, so do the same thing. Repeat your cue word and go back to your place at the beach. Breathe that blue-green color through, bringing quiet stillness to your physiology, to your body. you're back down to 0. Open your eyes.
Yeah.
So what I want everyone to understand is you actually have a choice about how your body responds. You just have to practice. It's like any other skill. So when you go in for therapy, like for an hour of therapy, right? Or you go in for craniosacral therapy or a somatic release therapy, in that moment, you're moving into the parasympathetic nervous system response in response to what someone else is saying or doing. It's not teaching you the skill to do it for yourself. So that's the foundation that we always want to start with, is how to really control your own physiology. So I have a whole program called You Unbroken, and it's a trauma healing program, and it gives you a ton of tools how to build emotional resilience and how to do this kind of thing where you're down regulating your sympathetic nervous system response or fight or flight and getting yourself into parasympathetic. When you start to play the piano, you suck at it. You just really sound terrible and it's cloddy, it's like, oh, so rough, and you just don't have the dexterity. Well, after you've practiced for a while, then you start to get graced with it, and it starts to become a habituated practice. And then you can go for a really long time without playing and sit down and have a muscle memory where you can actually do it. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't put in the time with the scales and the chords, then you don't have that muscle memory. And none of us comes out of our childhood with every skill we need. So when we have moments like this where our bodies react in ways that cause hormone imbalances and autoimmune disease and even cancer, it's actually a call to action just to learn some new skills.
Yeah.
And you have to practice them.
Yeah, it's really good. That's really, really good. All righty, let's go to the next one. It's another sex question.
All right.
This is from Vanita. Dr. Keesha was amazing. Her suggestion that one should have sex every day seems impractical to me. It's hard to meet men. I haven't had sex in more than 5 years. I'm 62, and the prospects of finding a guy are getting dimmer each day.
We've already answered that one. We actually answered it right in the interview. So someone's piping up again with that same question. That is, I hear that a lot. And it is true. It is really hard if you're not partnered to find somebody. But you know what? You don't need another person. You can actually self-pleasure, and you're going to get that orgasm going. You're going to keep your vagina in tune, right? You want to have that wall, that muscle tone, just like, I always say, take your vagina to the gym. You actually don't need to have a partner to have sex every day. And women are never given permission for that. Boys just grow up knowing they can do that. And women, we don't talk about it. We don't think about it hardly ever. And what I would recommend is, really take that on for yourself. Take responsibility for it for yourself.
We liked the take the vagina to the gym so much that we've decided we're going to do t-shirts and bumper stickers. Say, take your vagina to the gym. We'll quote you on them.
You better.
All righty. One of our speakers, this is from Dorota. I think that's how you say her name, or Dorota. One of our speakers mentions curcumin is good for endometriosis, which should then be good for hormone levels in general. But another speaker said that turmeric is a proven phytoestrogen and it increases or mimics estrogen. I have estrogen dominance, so now I'm confused whether it's safe for me to take or it'll make my situation worse.
The only way to know that is to do an estrogen metabolite test, because nobody is going to be the same in how they react to a phytoestrogen. So you have to know what your particular liver is doing and your particular genetics, and that's really the only answer anyone can give you. There's never going to be across the board a bad phytoestrogen that for everybody, like flax seeds, were in favor and then they were out of favor. Soy was in favor and then it was out of favor. And in reality, that's not ever going to be true for everyone, unless it's a genetically modified form of soy, and then it is bad for everybody. But, the concept of that there's one thing that's right for everyone is erroneous.
Right. Would that be the Dutch test that would give you that data?
I use a different one that I like a lot better that goes into more detail.
Okay. Do you want to share what that is? Just
Yeah,
so
it's a
people know.
Genova test. It's a Genova test for hormone metabolites.
Okay. Lisa said, you mentioned self-confrontation. Do you have some practical skills or protocols that you can share to help change one's mindset?
That's a great question. So I wrote a book called Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, and it takes you step by step through this process with worksheets. So I'm going to say that to start with. So the answer to that question is I have a forgiveness practice that actually came to me when I was in India in a cave during a meditation. It was downloaded many, many years ago. And the idea of self-confrontation came about in that meditation where you have to, Rumi, who's an ancient poet, said, if you're irritated by every rub, how will your mirror ever get polished, right? So the Eastern philosophy and mystical teachings have been very clear that it's really important for us to look in the mirror when we're having a difficult time with another person. So self-confrontation is going to come up, if you will allow it, many times throughout the day, probably every hour at least, where if you're triggered about something, then you look at yourself as the author and the person responsible for your own reaction. And that's really the easiest thing in the, that I can say right now is that's how you begin. If you say to yourself, I would never do that, it means you're in trouble. Right in that moment, it's the moment that you need to start doing that work. And this forgiveness exercise is laid out in Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, like I said. And then I also have it in an audio version. But what you do is you say, okay, I always use my my vice principal that sexually abused me in elementary school. So I always feel like it's helpful if I use that, because then, I always say, if I can do this, you can too, right? And so I'll use him. His name is Mr. Johnson. So when I first learned this practice, what you do is you say, okay, what kind of ego traits or personality traits would be something you would recognize or that you would assign to the person that hurt you? Okay, so let's say your husband forgot your birthday. What would you say about him that would cause him to forget your birthday? He's so thoughtless. He's narcissistic, he's self-centered, whatever it is, right? Forgetful, not mindful. So I'm going to use for Mr. Johnson, why would he sexually abuse a child? And for me, the things that I assign to that are going to be different than maybe somebody else. And there's a reason for that, and I'll say that in a second. So what I did when I first did this practice is I said, okay, so what is it about him that would make him do this behavior? Okay, a misuse of power, because he was administrator in the elementary school. It's definitely misusing power. Okay, well, he's also cruel. I'm going to say that because, any adult that does this to a child is definitely cruel. In this case, I said he was a bigot because he was African American and he called me white trash. I was like one of two white kids in an all black school. And so he would always say I was white trash. So those three things, right, are what I would start with. So when I look in the mirror and I self-confront and I say, if I use him as my mirror and I look and I say, okay, so how do I misuse power? Well, I'm a mother of 4 children, and that is really quick for me to point out the ways I misuse power, because any parent misuses power at some point, whether you're guilting your kid or you're not being functional in your communication, you're doing because I said so, or whatever it is that you do as a parent that's out of integrity. Those things happen constantly. And so I found that right away. I was like, oh yeah, I just did this to my son. So then, what people get hung up on is they say, well, that's not sexual abuse. Guilting your son is not at all the same thing. But actually the motivation it's misusing power. So people get hung up because they say, I would never do that behavior. The willingness to self-confront is the willingness to find the common human traits that we all share. We all misuse power at some point. Cruelty. I've been mean in my life for sure. Sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally. And I've definitely hurt people as a result. So I was able to find that pretty quick too. And then bigotry was really tough for me. I had a really hard time with that one because I am a Navy brat. I lived all over the world. I've been on the other side of bigotry a lot, lived in Japan as a child and had a lot of racism in that, and then a lot of racism in this Southern school I was in. So I grew up really being very open-minded and knowing what it feels like to be on the other side of bigotry. So I really considered myself as an adult not to be a bigot. So then I thought about this and I thought, how am I a bigot? And then I realized I'm a bigot against people that are bigots. I don't like people that are intolerant. So I'm actually intolerant intolerance.
Of intolerance.
That I went, oh my gosh, that's so clear. I am so intolerant with intolerance. Okay. So when you can self-confront, like what are the places where you get triggered and then you find yourself in them, then you can say, okay, I would like to have help with this. And maybe it's with a therapist. I usually will give it to the angels and say, okay, please help me recognize when I do these things so that I can be aware of it and change my behavior. Then when I've done that for a while and I no longer have those behaviors, and then when I see them on other people, I don't get triggered. Instead, I can have compassion for that person and go, oh yeah, I've been there before. And I may have a boundary with them. If they're doing those behaviors against me, I'll have a good boundary, but I'm still not going to judge them because now I've recognized myself in there. Self-confrontation allows you to let go of judgment, and judgment is a sure path to a hormone imbalance and disease whenever we're judging people, because it makes us rigid in our minds, and rigid mind makes a rigid body.
Yeah.
And brittle hormones. So that's really that's the first step to real forgiveness, because when you can get on the same playing field with the person that hurt you and you can actually do this work really well, then you can say, thank you for being my teacher. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to call up Mr. Johnson and go have tea with him. I'm always going to have a boundary with him. He's dangerous. You only reconcile with people that have hurt you in these deep ways if they show contrition and a willingness to self-confront for themselves and change. Otherwise, you don't. You have a boundary and you do all this work on your own. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to judge them and you don't have to tell them you're not judging them, right? When you say to someone, I'm not judging you, it actually is actually its own form, right? Uh-huh. You're doing this quietly for yourself. And what it's doing is it's releasing toxicity out of your body. People just love detoxes. I have this whole program called Whole Individualized Life Detox, or Wild Woman, and this is a big part of it, is detoxing held onto hurt. Because it doesn't matter how many heavy metals you get rid of, how many toxins you get rid of, how much sugar you get rid of. If you don't do this work, then you're just going to build it all back up again, because that's part of what attracts it to yourself.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting hearing you talk about this, because I'm thinking of a lot of similar work that I've done. And I'm sure you're familiar with Byron Katie and the work that she teaches. Mm-hmm. That's also a really accessible tool, but I'm listening to you kind of describe that whole idea of seeing your own flaws, I guess we could say, if we're going to judge ourselves, seeing ourselves and other people. And I had a similar experience with my father when we had a huge fight one year at Christmas. This was probably it was sometime in my 30s. I'm 43 now, so I was probably 35 or something. But I did exactly what you described. I took all the judgments, did that judge your neighbor thing, and then started turning them all around. And it was definitely confronting. And immediately it was amazing. It wasn't a willful, okay, I'm going to forgive my dad, I'm going to let go. It was like the immediate recognition that I am him in some ways. just
Right.
dissipated the judgment. It was just pulling the rug out from under it, taking the bottom out, whatever metaphor you want to use. It's such a powerful teaching. I'm so glad that you shared that, because that can be deeply transformative for sure.
It is. And in the deep immersion retreats I do, I actually talk, when people ask me about Byron Katie, she doesn't close the loop completely. And so what this does is it actually closes the loop completely. So it's really transformational. It's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All righty. Let's go to the next question. The doctor that put me on progesterone said that for the first few months, there would be a cleaning out process. I've been on it for 6 months, and I've noticed I've had a lot of kidney pain and lymphoid pain around my thyroid and around my right lung. Is this normal? Should I be worried?
Yes, and no, it's not normal. What it means is, and you shouldn't be worried, but what you should know is that your body's giving you feedback that you're not tolerating it. So again, as I've been talking about, your liver's not processing it, and there's a way to find out just exactly how much it's not, and that's with that Genova hormone metabolite test. So it's your body's just giving you feedback that this isn't. When your doctor said cleaning out process, progesterone is what your body uses as a signal to start a period. And so sometimes when we put people on bioidentical progesterone, their menstrual cycle will become irregular, like they'll start one early, or they'll have a bonus period, or maybe a little heavier bleeding as the body kind of gets used to it. What you're experiencing is a little different than that. That's not cleaning out. That's actually getting stopped up. So, yeah.
Okay, great. Next question is from Deborah. What is the best way to get testosterone levels up for women?
I use something called Revive Tea. It's in our store, and it works really well for both men and women. There's an herb called Tonka Ali that I love saying that, and it's really great for boosting testosterone too. Both of those.
Awesome. Alrighty. I think that about wraps up the questions that we had come in from everyone in the community. I mean, there's so many hormone type questions, though. One of the big takeaways and things that I really appreciate about Keesha that I would want to draw special attention to, and you might have something to add to this, Keesha, is how important it is, number one, to really do a thorough testing of your hormones to see what's going on. I appreciate a lot of the things that you've shared about that, Keesha, but I know that when doing a more complete test really gives you a lot of peace of mind about your direction and the things that you need to do to take care of yourself. And there's a lot that you learn, especially when you're working with a great practitioner, about self-care and what you need to do to support your body that aren't directly tied into bioidentical hormone therapy replacement.
Right.
There's so much to it. And I think every woman deserves to know what's happening in her body so that she can make choices around protocols, make choices around the kind of practitioner she's looking for to support her. I think it's really, really beneficial. And I appreciate a lot of the things that you shared around that for the women in our community.
Thank you. And that's, not just the baseline testing, but then doing it again in 5 months, and then doing it again in 5 more months, and then doing it again in 5 months. I usually will do a series of 4, because when you do a baseline, you don't know if you're on your way down or on your way up with something. You're just doing this one spot in time, right? And so now you've started your graph, but you don't know where it's been before, and you don't know where it's going to go. And so I like to do then 5 months after we started a protocol, okay, now how did you respond? And if you went what I call up and over the bell curve, where you got too much on board, which happens a lot too, then we know, oh, you respond really quickly. But we never know that until we do that testing. So if your buckets got full and they're overflowing, that can be a problem. So we want to know, and then we want to make an adjustment to that, whether you didn't respond well enough or you responded too well. And then we want to see 5 months later, so how did you respond to that adjustment? And then in another 5 months, now we have an ability to trend over a 2-year period, 4 different tests, and now we see a pattern. And then when we can have your pattern in front of us, then we can make educated, trajectories about what's going to happen when we do something. Mm-hmm. So it's really important that you understand that. And the testing is always out of pocket. So you have to really be prepared to invest in yourself. Like, okay, I'm in this for a couple of years to find a trend, to find out what my body's doing over a period of time as I do some kind of implementation. So you always want to do an assessment, an intervention, and then an evaluation. And oftentimes I don't see that being done. Mm-hmm. And by functional medicine people, it makes me nuts because someone will come and see me and say, yeah, I got started by a functional medicine or naturopathic doctor 2 years ago on this. And over the last 2 years, I've actually gained 25 pounds, or I've had vaginal dryness, or I've had, like whatever it is. And they didn't have a retest. And that may not be the doctor's fault. Maybe the patient never went back because they wanted to save some money, right? Mm-hmm. And they didn't want to have to deal with it anymore. So what I'm saying is, please don't do that, because you can get yourself into trouble.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you for sharing with us. It's so wonderful to have amazing women who are as qualified as you are talking to us about this. All of these different issues related to hormones and women's health. I feel like we've had kind of a system run by men, and I love men, and I love what men have done for us. And there's definitely been some gaping holes, and there's just something different about women talking to us, women doctors talking to us about these issues. I feel your compassion and your experience and your sensitivity to things that would often be overlooked by a doctor who didn't identify with being a woman. So I appreciate everything you've shared with us, both at the summit and in the Q&A. And I know that you have lots more to offer our community. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this summit. Bye,
of course.
Everybody.
See y'all later.